I have filed 411 intelligence reports in my career. I have never once been afraid to send one. I sent this one 3 times before it actually went through. The first 2 times I recalled it, sat with my hands pressed flat on the desk, read it again, told myself I was being irrational. Sent it a 3rd time. My name is Voss Creel. I am a senior intelligence attaché of the Dominion Collective, which is a title that means I have watched civilizations rise and collapse for long enough that almost nothing surprises me anymore. The Gren pacification, the silence of Euro 7, the end of the Kelthian Empire, which took 11 days and left a debris field the size of a small moon. I wrote those reports with steady hands. My hands are not steady right now. The signal came in at 0312 local station time. I was awake. I am always awake at 0312, because I stopped sleeping well during the Kreth conflict and never quite recovered the habit, and I picked it up on the secondary intelligence array before our automated systems even flagged it. That is the thing about doing this job for as long as I have. You develop a sense for the signals that matter, a kind of itch at the back of the mind that says, this one is different. The signal originated from the outer edge of the quarantine belt. I want to be precise about what the quarantine belt means, because I need whoever reads this report to understand the weight of that location. 312 years ago, the major spacefaring civilizations of this galaxy signed what we call the Sathara Compact. It was not a treaty of peace. It was a treaty of survival. The compact drew a boundary around a region of space roughly 40 light-years in diameter, and the single rule it established was this: no one enters. Not for exploration, not for diplomacy, not for any reason that any species has yet invented. The Vorath Empire controls the quarantine belt. The Vorath Empire is not a military power in the way that the Dominion or the Kreth Federation are military powers. Those are nations with armies. The Vorath are something older, and something that I have spent my career finding it difficult to put clinical language around. They do not conquer territory in any way we recognize. They simply make it theirs. The species who have refused to accept that distinction no longer exist in any form I can document. The name the Vorath use for what they do to those species has no translation that my matrix will render cleanly. I filed it under a placeholder 11 years ago and never found a better word. Neither did anyone else. So when I say a signal came from the outer edge of the quarantine belt, I need you to understand. Signals do not come from the quarantine belt. Signals go in. They do not come back. This one did. And it was not a distress call. It was not a warning beacon. It was not the automated emergency pulse of a dying ship. It was a conversation. My translation matrix took 4 minutes to confirm what my ears already suspected. The language was human. Specifically, it was English, which is one of the dominant communication languages of a species called humans, who have been spacefaring for approximately 47 years, and were classified in our threat assessment database as a Category C curiosity, pre-industrial emotional primates who discovered faster-than-light travel by accident during what their own historical records describe as an experiment that was supposed to do something else entirely. For the first decade after that discovery, our surveillance noted they used their new capability primarily to visit each other's ocean environments. We flagged them as low priority. We updated the file quarterly. We were not worried. The conversation I intercepted was between what the translation matrix identified as multiple male voices, relaxed in register, with a tonal quality that I initially cataloged as post-conflict decompression, the kind of loose, easy talk you hear from soldiers who have finished something and are waiting for the next thing. That interpretation was wrong. They were not decompressing. They were preparing. One voice said something the matrix rendered as, "All right, gear check, 5 minutes." Another said something back that took the matrix 2 passes to handle. It kept offering me approximations. On the 3rd pass, it settled on, "Let's go wake them up, boys." I sat with that phrase for longer than I should have. Wake them up. I pulled our tactical database on the Vorath's standard response protocol for territorial incursion. I had read it before, years ago, in the context of briefing a junior analyst who was new to the quarantine belt file. I read it again now, in a different context entirely. The protocol is thorough. The Vorath have had 300 years to refine it. It involves, in order, sensor confirmation, deployment of a forward observation cluster, followed by what the protocol calls a corrective response. that I will not describe here except to note that no species that has triggered it has ever triggered it twice. Then I pulled up the sensor feed from the belt's outer marker buoys. The human ship was not running. Every species that has ever entered Vorath space has, at some point in the engagement, run. It is not cowardice. It is intelligence. Knowing when to leave is the most important military skill a civilization can develop, and every civilization eventually develops it, usually after learning the lesson once in a way that they do not forget. The human ship was decelerating. I watched it reduce speed on the sensor display. I watched it orient itself. And then I watched it do something that I have been trying to find accurate language for ever since, because the language I want to use is not the language of an intelligence report. It stopped, in the middle of Vorath approach territory. It stopped, and it sat there, and it waited. Like it owned the space it was sitting in, like it had always owned it, and was simply allowing the Vorath to notice. I called my superior, Director Shanvel, at his home terminal. He answered on the fourth tone, which meant I had woken him, which was something I had not done in 11 years of working under his command. I told him what the sensors were showing. He was quiet for a long time. "Send me the feed," he said. I sent it. He was quiet for a longer time. "What is the hull marking on the human vessel?" he finally asked. I had tried to pull that detail earlier. The translation matrix had flagged it as only partially resolved. What it had managed to render was an image, not text. Some kind of animal, a large one. The posture of it suggested motion. The expression of it, to the extent that an animal's expression can be rendered in a hull graphic, suggested that whatever the animal was moving toward had made a significant error. "An animal," I said, "eating another animal." Director Shanvel made a sound I did not have a classification for. "Get me a full species brief on humans," he said. "Everything we have, every combat record, every tactical observation, every cultural marker. I want it by morning." "Yes, Director." And Voss Creel. "Director, what is your current assessment of the situation?" I looked at the sensor feed. The human ship, sitting still and patient in Vorath space. The countdown on my secondary display showing the estimated arrival time of the Vorath Forward Observation Cluster, 14 minutes. The small bottle I had pulled from the bottom drawer of my cabinet while I was waiting. A thing I had not opened since the end of the Gren pacification, a thing I had promised myself I would open at retirement. I had opened it 11 minutes ago. "My assessment," I said, "is that I do not yet have the right categories for what I am looking at." He ended the call. I looked at the feed for another long moment. The human ship had not moved. It was simply there, in space that nothing survived entering, broadcasting what my matrix confirmed was an active communication signal on an open channel. Not a threat broadcast, not a weapon lock. Music. I did not recognize the genre. The matrix did not have a clean category for it. What it could tell me was the tempo, which was not the tempo of a species that was afraid of what was coming in 14 minutes. I poured myself a second measure from the bottle. The Vorath observation cluster arrived in 13 minutes and 40 seconds. The music kept playing for another 8 minutes after that. Then it stopped, and the engagement began. I have filed 411 intelligence reports. I started the 412th at 0401 hours. I did not finish it until the following evening, because I rewrote the opening paragraph 19 times and still do not believe I got it right. The first thing I put in the report, and the first thing I removed, was the word impossible. I removed it because it was not precise. What I observed during the engagement between the human vessel and the Vorath forward cluster was not impossible. It happened. I have sensor data. I have the recordings. What it was outside every category I had built over a 411 report career, and that is a different thing from impossible, but it sits in the same neighborhood and I kept reaching for the wrong word. Let me be precise about what I observed. The Vorath Forward Observation Cluster consisted of 6 vessels. I want to be specific about those 6 vessels, because context matters here, and I do not want anyone reading this report to make the mistake of thinking the humans encountered a minor patrol. These were not minor patrol vessels. The 6-vessel cluster is the Vorath's standard initial response formation, and it is the formation that ended the Kreth resistance in 9 minutes. 9 minutes was considered slow. The Vorath analysts I have spoken to over the years, during the rare diplomatic exchanges the Dominion maintains with the Belt's perimeter stations, have noted that 9 minutes was slow because the Kreth ships attempted evasive maneuvers, which the Vorath found inefficient. 6 vessels, standard formation, the kind that ends things. They emerged from the Belt boundary at 0427 hours. The human ship's music stopped at 0426 hours and 51 seconds. 9 seconds of quiet. And then the human vessel opened a communication channel, not to its own fleet, not to any known allied frequency, directly to the Vorath cluster. The transmission lasted 44 seconds. My matrix struggled with portions of it, but the core of the message resolved cleanly enough. The human on the channel, male voice, calm, with a particular quality of calm that I have since spent considerable time trying to categorize, stated that the human vessel had entered this region for what he described as a look around, that they had no hostile intent, that they were aware they had crossed a marked boundary and were prepared to discuss that situation, and that they hoped the Vorath would respond in kind. He said respond in kind, and then he waited. The Vorath did not respond. What the Vorath did was begin the standard corrective response sequence, which I will not detail here, but which I can summarize as, it is not a discussion. It has never been a discussion. It is the thing that happens when you are still in Vorath space, after they have decided they are finished waiting. The human channel stayed open. The same voice said, very quietly, all right then. And then the human vessel did something that my sensor array spent 4 minutes trying to correctly categorize, because it did not match any combat pattern in our database for any known spacefaring species. Not the Kreth, not the Dominion's own fleet tactical library, not even the theoretical engagement models we use for training exercises. The human ship moved toward the Vorath cluster, not around them, not into a flanking position, not into any position that my analysts, reviewing the footage afterward, could identify as a classically advantageous combat placement. Directly toward them, at speed. The Vorath response was, and I choose this word carefully, confused. Not in any way they would describe. The Vorath do not get confused, but their response timing was 0.7 seconds slower than their protocol specifies, and in Vorath engagement terms, that is not a delay, it is a shock. The first exchange was brief. The human ship took damage. My sensors confirmed a hull integrity reduction of roughly 12% on its forward section. That kind of damage, to any ship in the Dominion fleet, would trigger an immediate damage control response, a tactical reassessment, and in most scenarios a withdrawal flag from the commanding officer. What happened on the human ship was that someone sealed the breach manually. I want to stay with that detail for a moment, because I have thought about it considerably since. The breach was on the forward section. The forward section of a ship in active engagement is the worst possible place to be during an engagement. It is the direction the weapons are pointed. It is where the impacts arrive first. It is, by any tactical logic I am familiar with, a place you move away from when things are going badly. One of the humans moved toward it, sealed it. The engagement continued. What happened over the next 19 minutes I have broken into a timeline in the attached report appendix, because laying it out as a narrative does not do justice to what was actually occurring, which was not a battle in any sense I have documentation for. A battle implies 2 forces, 2 sets of tactics, 2 strategic frameworks meeting each other. What I observed was 1 force operating on a known framework, and 1 force that appeared to be, and I have verified this interpretation with 3 separate analysts who reviewed the same data and reached the same conclusion, operating on no framework at all. The humans adapted, not the ship, not the tactical system, the individual crew members, making individual decisions, in real time, each one different from what the previous human had done, each one exploiting a specific gap in the Vorath response, that the Vorath response was not designed to account for, because no engagement model accounts for this. You build your defensive protocols around patterns. Patterns are what trained forces produce. Trained forces have doctrine, and doctrine is predictable, and predictability is how you build a counter. The humans did not have a pattern, or rather, and this is the distinction that kept my 3 analysts up for 2 additional evenings, they had a pattern, but the pattern was, whatever this specific situation requires right now, not what the manual says, not what training says. What this moment, this second, this particular angle of incoming fire requires. One of my analysts described it as watching someone solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. Another analyst said, "They fight like water." I put that in the report and then removed it because it is not precise language. Then I put it back because I could not find more precise language. And sometimes the imprecise thing is the truest thing available. 19 minutes. At the end of it, the Vorath cluster was neutralized. All 6 vessels. 2 destroyed in the initial exchange. 4, and this is the part I have reread more than any other section of my own data. 4 disabled but intact. Intact. The crew alive. The systems cut but not crushed. The Vorath soldiers inside them alive and unhurt. And, according to the signal data I pulled from their internal communications once the engagement ended and their encryption fell, thoroughly unable to process what had just happened to them. The humans disabled 4 Vorath vessels with the crew inside them alive. They could have destroyed them. They chose not to. I have tried to find the tactical logic in that decision. I asked my analysts. I ran it through 3 different engagement modeling systems. The modeling systems all returned the same answer. It is not tactically optimal to leave a living enemy force behind you. It introduces variables. It reduces your operational security. Every engagement model agrees. The humans left them alive anyway. And then the human ship, which had 12% reduced hull integrity on its forward section and a manually sealed breach, and 19 minutes of combat behind it, turned around and went back to where it had come from. Not at full speed, not at the speed of something fleeing. At a pace that I can only describe as unhurried. The music started again at 04:46 hours. Different song. My matrix still did not have a clean genre category for it. What it could tell me was the mood, which it rendered as celebratory. I sat in my office for a very long time after that. The bottle was on my desk. I had not poured a third measure. I was not looking at it. I was looking at the sensor feed from the Vorath observation cluster wreckage, at the 4 intact vessels, at the life signs inside them. 37 Vorath soldiers, alive and sitting in the dark because the humans had turned off their systems but not their oxygen, and I was thinking about the word chosen. They could have destroyed those ships. They chose something else. I did not know yet what that choice meant. I did not know if it was mercy. I did not know if it was message. I did not know if it was both, or something I did not have a category for yet. What I knew was this. I was looking at a species that had the capability to end 37 lives, and decided, in the middle of an engagement they had not started, to find a different option. That is not what the Dominion does. That is not what any species does, in the heat of combat, against an enemy who started the exchange. I filed the report at 18:47 hours. I did not put a threat level number in the designated field. The field is still blank. I am still thinking about what number would be honest. The high table gave me 6 weeks to produce the full species dossier on humans. I finished a preliminary version in 4, and sent it up the chain with a note that said the preliminary version was already significant enough to warrant immediate discussion, and that the full version was going to be considerably more significant, and that if anyone on the high table was still operating on the Category C curiosity classification, they should update their assumptions before the morning briefing. I have been doing this job for a long time. I do not often use the word urgent in internal communications. I used it 4 times in that note. No one pushed back on the word choice. I started where I always start, their history of conflict. I pulled every piece of documentation we had on human warfare going back 3,000 years, which is as far as their own preserved records go, and I sat down with it the way I sit down with all civilizations I am asked to assess, methodically, starting with the earliest recorded conflicts and moving forward, watching for the patterns that reveal what a species is, underneath all the technology and politics and cultural decoration. Warfare is the honest thing. It shows you what a species reaches for when everything else has been stripped away. I expected to find what I always find. I have studied 114 species in this career, and the pattern of their military histories is consistent enough that I can describe it without checking my notes. The earliest wars are brutal and personal, and driven by resource scarcity. The middle periods bring more sophisticated weapons but the same basic motives, dressed in ideology. Then comes the turn. The species develops the capacity for truly large-scale destruction, uses it once or twice, is horrified by the result, and begins building toward cooperation, and eventually interstellar expansion. The wars do not stop entirely, but they diminish in scale and frequency as the civilizations mature. Every species follows this arc, more or less. It is not universal law, but it is close enough to universal law that when a species deviates from it significantly, we flag it. Humans deviated from it significantly. The early period was as I expected, brutal, personal, resource-driven. The humans have a significant portion of their ancient history that reads like a manual for how many ways a primate can invent to take something from another primate. I flagged it, noted it was consistent with early-stage species development, and moved on. The middle period is where the deviation began. Their wars did not become less brutal as their civilization advanced. They became more efficient. There is a difference, and it matters enormously. Less brutal means the civilization is developing a moral resistance to the act of warfare. More efficient means the civilization is getting better at it. The humans got better at it. With every century, every generation, every technological leap, they did not step back from the machinery of conflict. They improved it. They studied it. There is an entire academic discipline among humans, studied at their institutions of higher learning, devoted to nothing but the theory and practice of warfare. They call it military science. Science. They applied the same intellectual rigor to organized conflict that other species apply to medicine or engineering, or the understanding of natural law. I read their military history for 3 days before I came up for air. On the 4th day, I called Director Chanvel. I need to reclassify the file, I told him. What category? I don't have a category yet, I said. That's part of what I'm calling about. He was quiet for a moment. Voss Creel, your job is to put things in categories. Yes, I said. I know. I went back to the documents. The moment in their history that stopped me. The moment I read, and then reread, and then sat with for an hour before continuing, was what they call the Cold War. 2 major human powers, roughly a century before they achieved spaceflight, developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. Not their enemies. Their entire planet. Every living thing on it. The kind of weapon that renders victory meaningless because there is nothing left to win. They built it anyway. And then, when they had it, neither side used it. For decades. They held those weapons and they looked at each other across the void, and neither one fired. Not because they could not because there was a technological barrier, because they had looked at the equation and understood that using the weapon ended the species, and the species was worth more than the conflict. That is not the part that stopped me. The part that stopped me was that they kept building more. The same weapon, different configurations, larger yields, more efficient delivery systems. They built more of them, while simultaneously holding a fragile agreement not to use any of them. They expanded their capacity for planetary destruction, while expanding their diplomatic frameworks designed to prevent that destruction from occurring. I asked one of my junior analysts to explain this to me, and she thought about it for a moment and said, they wanted to make sure the other side could never feel safe enough to risk the first move. I asked her if she found that comforting. She said she was not sure. Comforting was the right word. The humans came very close, during this period, to ending themselves. Several times. I found documented instances where the destruction of their planet was prevented by individual humans making individual decisions in moments of extreme pressure, with incomplete information, in the middle of the night, against protocols that said otherwise. One incident in particular, a single human, alone in a monitoring station, detecting what the systems told him was an incoming strike, with every protocol and every training instinct pointing toward one response, chose to wait, to not follow the protocol. Because something in his assessment of the situation told him the data was wrong, even though he could not verify that in the time available. He was right. I have thought about that man more than I expected to. He held the survival of his species in his hands for approximately 12 minutes, and he chose, against all instruction, to be patient. They gave him an award for it, decades later. He died before the award was presented. I moved on to their military culture, which is where I found the thing I had been approaching from all sides without quite reaching. Every spacefaring species has a warrior class. This is expected. What varies is how the species treats that class, as a tool, as an elite, as a burden, as a sacred thing. Humans treat their warriors as all four simultaneously, which is complicated and interesting and deserves its own file. But it is not the thing that stopped me. What stopped me was the section of our database on human special operations forces. Every major spacefaring civilization has specialized military units, elite forces, trained for the scenarios that standard military cannot handle. This is logical. The Dominion has them, the Kreth had them, the selection processes vary, but the principle is the same. Find the individuals with the highest capability profiles, and give them better training and better equipment, and send them to the situations that require better everything. Human special operations are selected differently. I want to be exact about this because I think the exactness is the point. They are not selected primarily for physical strength, though the physical requirements are extreme by any measure I can use. They are not selected for intelligence, though high intelligence is common among them. They are not even selected for training performance in the traditional sense. They are selected for their response to failure. The selection processes I reviewed, and the humans have several distinct programs across their various national militaries, each with its own structure, but all sharing this core principle, are designed to systematically break candidates, not to eliminate the weak, to find the ones who cannot be broken. The training introduces conditions of extreme physical and psychological stress, sleep deprivation, cold, pain, failure, and most importantly, the removal of any visible endpoint. You cannot see the finish line. You do not know when it will end. You are asked to continue in conditions where continuing makes no rational sense, because your body is past its limits, and your mind is telling you that the reasonable thing is to stop. The ones who pass are the ones who did not stop. Not the ones who did not feel like stopping. Not the ones who were not suffering. The records are clear on this. The ones who pass are in as much pain as the ones who do not. They are as exhausted. They are as afraid. They continue anyway. Those are the ones the humans point at unsolvable problems. I closed the file. I got up and walked to the small window in my office that looks out at the station's secondary docking ring. I stood there for a while looking at nothing in particular, which is something I almost never do during working hours. Then I went back to my desk and I opened the file again, and I read the last section, which I had been putting off. It was the section on what humans tell each other, their stories, their fiction, the narratives a civilization creates to explain itself to itself. I read the stories they tell about their warriors. I read the memorials they build, the ceremonies they keep, the words they put on the graves of soldiers. I read what they consider heroic, what they consider worth commemorating, what they choose to pass on to the next generation as the thing most worth knowing. There is a pattern in all of it. I have never seen this particular pattern in any other species. They are not afraid of dying in a conflict. That is not unusual. Many warrior cultures develop a philosophical relationship with the risk of death, but when I looked closely at the human version, I found something different underneath it. They are not unafraid of death. Their literature makes clear that the fear is real and persistent and very much present. What they have developed, culturally and individually, is not the absence of fear. It is the capacity to act directly against their fear, while feeling it fully, because they have decided something else matters more. They have a word for this: courage. Every species has a word for it, but when I compared the human concept to the Dominion's closest equivalent, and to the Kreth equivalent, I found the definitions diverged in a small but enormously significant way. In Dominion culture, the highest form of this quality is the ability to suppress fear, to reduce it, train it, minimize it, until the soldier can function without it interfering. For humans, suppressing the fear is not the point. The point is going forward anyway. The fear stays. The soldier moves. I wrote that in the report and looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote underneath it, recommend immediate reclassification from Category C curiosity to Category unassigned, pending development of appropriate category. Then I wrote, we have not been studying the right things about this species. Then I stopped for the day because I had been working for 16 hours, and I had a headache, and the bottle was still on my desk, and I poured myself a measure, and sat in the quiet, and thought about a man alone in a monitoring station, in the middle of the night, with the data telling him to launch, and the world balanced on his decision. He waited. He was right. I am beginning to understand that this is not a coincidence. I am beginning to understand that the ability to wait in conditions that are screaming at you to act, is something the humans have refined into an art form. I am not sure whether to find that reassuring. I am not sure there is a version of it that is reassuring. The Vorath did not wait long. That is not in their nature. I have studied the Vorath for long enough to understand that what looks like patience in their behavior is not patience at all. It is the particular stillness of something that has never had to be patient, because the things it is waiting for always come. When they are kept waiting, they do not recalibrate, they do not reassess, they escalate, because escalation is the only response they have ever needed. They took Station Kelvar 9 on a Tuesday, Dominion Station, civilian and research personnel. 417 beings going about the ordinary business of a research installation, and in the space of 40 minutes they were hostages, not in any physical way that I can point to clearly in this report, but held in a way that the Vorath are good at, surrounded, outgunned, and very aware of both. The message was not sent to the humans. It was sent to us, to the Dominion, and through us to the broader galactic community that had been watching the belt with very careful attention since my report circulated. The message was simple enough that even my matrix rendered it without confusion. It said, "You invited this. Now manage it." They meant the humans. They meant that we had failed to control our new neighbors, and that their patience with that failure had ended, and that 417 beings were the price of our negligence. We called an emergency session of the High Table. I was asked to attend, which was unusual. I am not typically in the room for High Table sessions. I sit outside and send my reports in through proper channels, and occasionally, I am called to answer a specific question, and then I go back to my office. This time Director Chanvel looked at me across the table at 0630 hours with circles under his eyes and said, "Sit down, Voss Creel. You are the only person in this room who has read everything." I sat down. The session lasted 4 hours. The consensus that emerged was the consensus it always is when the Vorath are involved. Negotiate, pay, and resolve the situation as quickly as possible before the Vorath lose interest in negotiation and move on to the other option. The Vorath have two options. They prefer the second one. Every diplomat in the galaxy is invested in keeping them using the first one. The human diplomatic vessel arrived at the negotiation station at 1340 hours. No one had invited it. The Dominion liaison at the station door, a young official named Petra Harlow who I later spoke to and who described the encounter with the kind of flat, careful tone people use when they have processed something all the way through shock and out the other side, said the human ambassador presented her credentials and walked past, without waiting for clearance. Her name was Marion Voss. She was not young. She walked like someone who had walked into rooms she was not invited into before, and had never once been turned around. She sat down at the table. The high table chair, Chairman Vethalor, looked at her with the expression of a very experienced diplomat who has been surprised against his will. "Ambassador," he said, "we had not confirmed your attendance." "No," she said, "you hadn't." A brief silence. "We are in the process of formulating a response to the Vorath's demands," Chairman Vethalor said. "A negotiated resolution." "Don't," she said. The room was quiet. "Don't what?" asked the chairman. "Negotiate," she said. "Not today, not this one." She poured herself something from the carafe at the center of the table, water, apparently, which is not what most beings reach for in high-tension diplomatic sessions. And she looked around the table and she said, "We're going to need you all to sit tight for a little while." Chairman Vethalor said with the careful control of a being who has been in diplomacy for 60 years and is currently being managed by someone else at his own table, "Ambassador, 417 beings are currently being held on Station Kelvar 9. We have a responsibility." "We know," she said. "We're handling it." "How many vessels are you deploying?" asked one of the table members. Admiral Darren Sue, who commands the Dominion's Third Fleet, and who does not often display visible emotions in professional settings. He was displaying one now. It was the expression of a person who has asked a question they already half know the answer to, and are hoping the answer is wrong. Ambassador Marion Voss looked at him. "3, she said. Admiral Darren Sue said, "3 vessels?" "3 personnel," she said. The room went in a direction I do not have precise language for. I will say this. I have sat in rooms where difficult news was received. I have sat in rooms where the received news was significantly worse than what anyone present had anticipated. I have learned, over the course of a long career, to assess rooms accurately and quickly. It is a survival skill in my profession. What happened in that room when Ambassador Voss said 3 personnel was not panic. It was not confusion. It was the specific look of a group of highly experienced beings who have just had their mental model of a situation moved without their permission. They all looked at the ambassador. She was drinking her water. "Ambassador," said Director Chanvel from beside me, and his voice was doing something I had never heard it do in 11 years of working for him. It was being careful, delicate, the way you speak to something you are not sure how to hold. 3 personnel, against a Vorath garrison installation, with 417 civilian lives in the balance. "Yes," she said. "You are aware of the Vorath's garrison complement, their weapons systems, their—" "Yes," she said. Silence. "You're not concerned," he said. She looked at him. It was a measuring look, not unfriendly, the look of someone deciding how much of a real answer to give. "I'm always concerned," she said. "That's why I sent the ones I sent." She would not say more about that. She answered other questions: logistics, timing, the communication protocols she had already established with the Kelvar 9 station to ensure the civilian population was aware help was coming. She was precise and thorough, and the only thing she would not give was specifics about what 3 people were going to do inside a fortified Vorath installation. At 1700 hours, she excused herself from the table. She said she had some messages to send and suggested the high table take a recess and have dinner. She said it in a tone that indicated she expected them to actually take this advice. Most of them did. I did not. I went to my temporary office in the station, and I pulled up everything in our database on human special operations. Specifically, I pulled the file that I had opened and closed 3 times in the preceding weeks, the one I had been approaching from all sides. I read it again with different eyes. The selection process, the training, the thing they were building. Not a weapon, a type of person. A person who has been taken apart and put back together in conditions designed to find the one thing that could not be removed. Call it will, call it stubbornness. The humans have several words for it, and none of them quite cover it, and I suspect that is because the thing itself is larger than the words they have found for it. I read about specific operations these units had conducted, the ones that were now declassified in the fragments of human military history we had access to, the situations they had been sent into. I read the criteria for deployment, when standard military assets were assessed as insufficient, when the situation had been classified as having a low probability of success, when the options available were all unacceptable and someone needed to go in anyway. 3. I sat with that number. 3 people. Into a Vorath garrison station, with 417 civilian lives balanced on the other side of the equation. I was afraid. I want to be honest about that in this report, because I am trying to be precise, and honesty is part of precision. I was afraid, not for myself, but for those 417 people. Not because I doubted the humans entirely, but because doubt is the appropriate response to insufficient information, and I had insufficient information, and 417 people are a lot of beings to be wrong about. At 1743 hours, the Vorath station went dark. Not destroyed, not attacked in any way our sensors could identify from the outside. It simply stopped communicating. The signals went out, the automated beacons stopped. The station became, in sensor terms, a very large silent object sitting in space, containing the Vorath garrison and the Dominion civilians and 3 humans who had gone in approximately 27 minutes after Marion Voss left the negotiating table. I watched the sensor feed. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. I went and found Ambassador Voss. She was in a small lounge near the docking ring, sitting in a chair that was slightly too large for her, drinking something warm from a small container. She was looking out the viewport at the stars, in the direction of the now silent station. I stood nearby for a moment. "How long?" I asked. She looked at me. She had the eyes of someone who has spent a long time in rooms where large things are decided. 40 minutes, she said, maybe less. How do you know? She was quiet for a moment. Because I know who I sent, she said. We sat in silence for a while. I did not ask her more. She did not offer more. The lounge was quiet. Her warm drink steamed faintly. At 18:31 hours, the station came back online. It was 44 minutes, not 40. I noted the gap in my report but did not comment on it. 4 extra minutes inside a Vorath garrison, in a situation with no documented probability of success. The 4 minutes might have been nothing. The 4 minutes might have been everything. I don't know what happened in those 4 minutes, and I have not been told. And I have decided that this particular piece of not knowing is one I can live with. The station came back online. Systems restored. Civilian population unharmed. All 417 of them, in the station's central shelters where someone had directed them to wait, and they had waited, and they were unharmed. The Vorath garrison, 91 soldiers, was alive. Every one of them. Secured. Weapons removed. System access cut. But alive, and physically uninjured, which is a result that our engagement modeling team assessed afterward as having a statistical probability so low that 2 of the 3 analysts who ran the numbers made errors in their calculations and had to be corrected because they had assumed the answer was a calculation mistake. It was not a calculation mistake. The Vorath commanding officer opened a channel. He appeared on the screen of the high table chamber, where all available table members had assembled when the station came back online. He was a senior Vorath commander, experienced and decorated within their system, a being I had reviewed in our military files as someone who had never shown any behavioral indicator resembling what I was seeing on his face now. He looked, in the precise language of my professional assessment, like a being who had been shown something that had moved the walls of his understanding several feet in a direction he had not anticipated. He said, "The humans send a message." Chairman Vethalor said, very carefully, "What message?" The Vorath commander looked at something off to the side of his screen for a moment, then back. "They said, we were being polite. Please don't make us stop." The high table chamber was quiet for a long time. I was looking at my hands. At some point I had picked up the coin. I carry it everywhere now. I am not certain when I started doing this. I noticed it in my hand and did not put it down. The session that followed lasted 3 hours and covered logistics, the release of the station, the withdrawal of the Vorath forces, the diplomatic language that would be used to describe what had happened in a way that preserved just enough face for the Vorath that they would go, and just enough truth for the galaxy that they would understand. I took notes. I answered questions when asked. I did my job. Afterward, Director Shanvel found me in the corridor. "Final report," he said. "Timeline?" "End of the week," I said. He looked at me for a moment. In 11 years, he has looked at me many ways. Critically, approvingly, with impatience, with the particular expression of a superior who trusts a subordinate but is running out of time. He was looking at me with something I recognized only because I had felt it myself for weeks now. "What is your assessment?" he asked. Not of the situation. He had the reports on the situation. He meant, what do you actually think? The thing that does not fit in the official document. I held the coin. "I think," I said, "that we made a very old mistake. We looked at what they built and decided we understood what they were. We should have looked at what they survived." He held my gaze for a moment. "And what did they survive?" "Themselves," I said. "Mostly, for a very long time." He said nothing. After a moment he nodded, once, and walked back down the corridor. I went back to my office. I sat down. The coin was warm in my hand from being held. I wrote the report, the official version, the one with the section headings, and the data appendices, and the recommended reclassification requests, and the tactical assessment updates. I wrote it thoroughly, and I believe it is accurate, and it will go into the Dominion's permanent intelligence record, and future analysts will read it as context when they are trying to understand this period. And then, when the official version was filed, I opened a new document. No headers, no classification markers, no intended recipient. Something I wrote for whoever comes after. I want to say something true about what I have learned, because the official report contains the facts, and the facts are useful, but they are not the whole shape of the thing. Every species I have ever studied goes to war to survive. That is the engine of it. Resources, territory, dominance, security. The names change, but survival is always somewhere in the root system. Even the Vorath, underneath all the ancient power and the 300 years of unchallenged authority, are doing what living things do, protecting what is theirs, ensuring their continuation. Humans go to war for survival too. I would not want to overstate the difference. They are not alien in this. But there is a layer underneath the survival motive that I found in the records and could not find a match for in any other species file. They go to war, sometimes, for people they will never meet, for generations not yet born, for principles that cannot be held or measured. They send their own people into situations they know are lethal, because the alternative is that something will be lost that they decided is worth more than the people they are sending. And the people they send agree. The ones who pass the training, the ones who become what the humans call their special forces, they know the equation. They took it apart and examined it from every angle and said yes. This, me, whatever is required. I have tried to find the word for that. The humans have a word. Several, in fact. The one that appears most often in the records is duty, not obligation, which implies external pressure. Duty, which implies an internal structure, a thing that was built inside the person over time, that does not need to be enforced because the person is already enforcing it on themselves. 3 people went into a Vorath garrison station. They came out. The 417 came out. The 91 Vorath soldiers came out. No one I have spoken to since then has asked me what the 3 humans looked like coming off that station. I have watched the docking footage. I have watched it more than once. They came off the station the way people walk when the job is done, and they are ready for something to eat. A little tired. At ease with each other in the way of people who have been through something together. One of them said something that made the other 2 laugh, and the camera caught the sound but not the words, and I had the sound analyzed, and the matrix returned an error because it could not separate the voices. I let it go. I did not need to know what they said. What I needed to know was what they looked like saying it, which was, like people who had expected to come back, like people for whom going was hard but never in doubt, like people who had looked at something impossible and noted it down and moved on to the next thing. The coin is on my desk. I picked it up the first time months ago, from the reference materials sent with the initial species brief, and I have not put it down for more than a few hours since. It is a small thing, heavy for its size, made of metal that feels different from Dominion alloys, denser, more worn, the kind of object that has been touched by many hands over many years. There is a motto on it. I had it translated early in the process and filed the translation without looking at it too hard, because at that point, I was still building toward the understanding, and I was not ready for the specifics. I am reading it now. The only easy day was yesterday. I have looked at this phrase for a long time. I looked at it, and thought about it, and set it aside, and came back to it, and looked at it again. It is not a boast. That is the first thing. It is not claiming superiority, or victory, or power. It is not the motto of a force that believes it cannot be beaten. It is a description of reality, their reality, specifically, the reality of what they have chosen to do with their lives. The hard thing is coming. It is always coming. Yesterday was easier, and tomorrow will be harder, and we are walking toward it anyway. Every morning they wake up and the day will be harder than the day before, and they have made their peace with this. They made their peace with it in the selection process, when the training was designed to simulate exactly this truth. There is no end visible, there is only continuing, and they said yes. I am writing this for whoever reads it next, whoever the intelligence attaché is in 20 years, or 50, or 100, who pulls this file and wants to know what we understood and when. Here is what I understand. The humans are not frightening because of their weapons. They are not frightening because of their numbers or their technology or the speed at which they develop new capabilities, though all of those things are worth monitoring carefully. They are what they are because of what happens when you defeat them. Every species in the galaxy has a threshold, a point where the cost of continuing exceeds the value of the thing they are fighting for, and they reassess, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. This is rational. This is what rational species do. It is what allows civilizations to survive, the recognition that some battles are not worth the price. I have looked through every piece of human military history that we have. I have looked for their threshold. I have been looking for months. I cannot find it. I am not saying it does not exist. I am saying I cannot find it. I am saying that in every documented case where humans were defeated or suffered catastrophic losses, or faced an enemy that by any rational measure should have ended the engagement. They continued. Not all of them, not always in the same way, but enough of them, enough times, that the pattern is not coincidence. The pattern is philosophy. They do not stop. They keep going, and they adapt, and they find a way through, or they find a way around, and if there is no way they make one, and then they come back. The coin is in my hand. The only easy day was yesterday. I filed this report. I requested reassignment, for reasons I have described in a separate communication to Director Chanvel, the primary one being that I have spent 40 years looking at things clearly, and I am no longer certain I can look at this particular subject clearly. I have too much of it in my head, too much of it sitting in my chest in a way I cannot categorize. The High Table has not yet responded to the reclassification request. I believe they are doing what I did, in the early weeks of this file. Trying to find the right category. Realizing the category does not exist yet. Sitting with that, in offices that are a little too quiet, with sensor data that keeps showing them things that do not fit. I kept the coin. I do not know if the being who reads this next will be Dominion. I do not know what the galaxy will look like in 50 years. I do not know what choices the humans will make, or what choices will be made about them, or how the space between our two civilizations will be navigated in the coming decades. I know this. They sent 3 people into a Vorath garrison station. I know what the Vorath are, what they represent, what they have done to every species that crossed them in 3 centuries of unchallenged reach. 3 people, and the lights went out. And 44 minutes later, everyone inside was alive. Take that seriously. Whatever you do with this information, whatever policy the Dominion builds around it, whatever diplomatic framework, whatever careful measured response, do not fail to take that seriously. They were being polite. We should all hope they remain so. I have filed 423 intelligence reports. This is the only one I have been afraid to send. I sent it anyway. That, at least, I understand.